Okay, cool. It seems like the majority of people have filtered in. So, welcome everyone to our What Does My Lab Do event with Danny Rahal. So today we will be talking about his Health Equity in Youth Lab, and we will have not a short time, we will have time for a Q&A at the end if you guys have any questions. Yeah, it's going to be a great presentation, so I'll turn it over to Dr. Rahal.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming in, especially on a Monday. And yeah, I'm excited to tell you a little bit about myself and my lab. So I'm gonna go through how did I get to this position. I want to talk about my program of research and like some of the things I'm looking at in my lab, and then some common tasks that research assistants work on, and then just a few recommendations on my end for how to get involved in research. So for context, I'm from New Jersey, and then I actually went to college in North Carolina. I originally went in totally wanting to be pre-med, and then I'll talk about on the next slide, but I ended up majoring in psychology and biochemistry. And then from there, I knew I wanted to be in either developmental or health psychology, so I chose a program that offered both of those. I made sure it was a collaborative program so that then I'd be able to gain experience in both simultaneously. I mostly applied to graduate programs that were in cities because of my interest in studying diverse populations. Those don't have to be in cities, but in order to really have easy access to socioeconomic diversity, which was a major priority for my research, I ended up looking at a lot of cities, and then I ended up choosing UCLA. When I was there, I did do my PhD in developmental psychology, but I was really collaborative with the health psychology program. After getting my PhD, I went to Penn State University for 1 year to complete my postdoctoral training. So that was this program called PAMPT. That's the Prevention and Methodology Center or training program. So I had never heard of prevention science prior to joining this program, but prevention science, it's a really broad area. Essentially, you could be studying prevention of mental health problems, cancer, COVID. Prevention science is a super broad interdisciplinary field, but people are unified by their passion for trying to not only not only promote health in the long term, not trying to like reduce symptoms, but really trying to support youth and individuals in being as healthy as possible. So it's different from health psychology, which is really an individualized approach. So you see people who are doing a lot of community development work in prevention science as well. A big topic in prevention science is also substance use and substance use prevention. So that's part of why that program was such a natural fit for me. So just to recap, at UCLA, I got a lot of training in studying socioeconomically and racially diverse youth with a focus on adolescent development, a focus on the teen years. And then I got really interested in substance use as one really key health outcome during the teen years, which is why I pivoted, got some additional training at Penn State. Then, as pretty much as soon as I got to Penn State, I was really missing California, so I applied for this opportunity. And something that was really compelling about this to me, or unique about this program, was that here there's the Global Community Health Interdisciplinary Program, which I'm happy to answer questions about later. But it's really uncommon to be able to work with students in both psychology and global community health. So I thought that that was a really nice, unique thing about being at Santa Cruz. So I said that I was originally in pre-med. How did I get into psychology research? So I originally wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to promote health, and I didn't realize there were other avenues for doing so. When I entered college, I learned about this field of public health. I found it was so compelling to be able to not just reduce symptoms after people are already diagnosed or already having health consequences, but really trying to invest in community, support people before they're actually showing these problems, trying to give them the resources so that then they can be as feeling well and feeling healthy. So when I pursued public health, I actually got really involved in international community development. So I was able to do water quality testing in a couple of different countries, one of which was Uganda, where I interned for a summer. So for context, when I was working there, this was really focused on what do the communities need? Well, how do we support women and youth in having decision making here? Uh, Allowing these people to dream about what is best for them and then figure out what is holding them back. What material resources can we provide? So in this picture, we're seeing that here the people need, we're developing a seed lending program. There are a lot of people interested in agriculture, they just didn't have the right seeds for it. Um, and I was mostly doing water quality testing, and these were really remote villages. It was common for people to have to be trekking out to grab water for their families at least once a day. And you see, this can involve really long hikes. We could be going by boat to be able to access this freshwater sources, and we would have to be like climbing cliffside to be able to bring water back. So while this was really impactful and important work, I realized that I was interested. It was a bit discouraging for me seeing how much inequality there was in resources. And I didn't think that that was the best place for me to be investing my efforts. Instead, I was asking myself, what other factors are contributing to health risk day to day? What are things that are more within our control? What are things that we're doing to ourselves or to one another that might be affecting our health every day? And it's got me really interested in this idea of stress. This idea that when we're feeling really stressed, there's so much we can do about our lifestyle, how we engage with stress, how we think about stress, that can be really consequential for our health. Additionally, there's different types of stress, such as discrimination, something that really where people are really enacting on one another, and it is something that's having major health consequences for people. So I still maintain this interest in trying to promote health for people, trying to promote health equity, but I just pivoted from looking at resource allocation and community development to focusing more individually. I focused on differences in stress as one specific pathway that might be positioning certain people for poorer health outcomes. So, hopefully, this gives you a little bit about what I'm interested in. I'll go into more detail about it, but I wanted to pivot to what the research process really is. I have my lab on the right. So I started just a couple years ago, but I'm really grateful to have two graduate students working with me as I conduct this work. You might recognize this figure on the left from research methods, but essentially, when it comes to the research process, you really want to start with something that you're passionate about. Start with a really broad area of interest. I'm saying that I'm interested in health equity. I'm interested in looking at stress processes. That's not and I might have theories about this where if we aren't managing our stress well, if we have negative attitudes about stress, if some of us are more stress reactive, that might position us for poorer health. So I have this broad area, I have this theory guiding my work. Um, but then that has to be turned into an actionable research question. Whenever I do a study, it's always guided by one specific research question. Whenever I'm writing an article, normally I have a few research questions I'm trying to address in that. The research question tends to be a lot more specific, where it might be how does stress reactivity or how does biological reactivity to a threat or to a major stressor relate to substance use in youth? So I'll have these research questions, and then it can look at a few different ways in terms of finding the research design. I often find that people have data, but they have no idea how to analyze it. So that's a nice way for me to get collaborators where I'm advising them on how can we leverage this data, how can we analyze it, how can we look at and interpret stress processes based on what they have. Sometimes this will be us conducting our own data collection. And I'll go into the specific methods that we end up using for that. Um, Sometimes we can have exploratory studies, but oftentimes we have a hypothesis in mind. So that's when we'll pre-register the data. What pre-registration means, this is a really big push in psychology today, where you went through this careful effort to design a study. It's just listing it down somewhere online and saying, this is specifically what I designed this study for. This is what I had in mind before starting the data collection and analysis. You want to be crystal clear about that. Just unfortunately, there's a history of a lot of people saying, oh, yeah, of course my hypothesis was supported when I found this really counterintuitive thing. People designing a study, but then changing what they're thinking along the way once they see the data. So now this is a major part of the research process to pre-register, say, when I design the study, before peeking at anything, this is what I have in mind. This is what I'm expecting. It's totally okay to be wrong. We just want to be honest and transparent about it. So then we collect data, and that data is going to do one of two things. It's either going to support our hypothesis, which will strengthen theory, which is great. Write a paper about it, and then, that will revise our theory, and then we'll move on and keep thinking about it. What's the next question? Alternatively, if the data don't support it, if you design the study well enough, it's not going to be a barrier for publication or anything. It's still informing our understanding. It's a different thing if there's like major issues that you haven't addressed originally, and you have all of these different ideas as to why it might not have panned out. And in that case, you might just want to either revise that theory or revise your research design. Try to replan it, maybe add a different criteria, maybe change how you're measuring something, and then go through that process again. I want to start with this slide because I love studying stress research, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll see there's a million ways we can ask questions about this. So it's really fun for me that I can just keep on designing studies and go about it a lot of different ways. So this process, you see, it's a circle. It's constantly, it's a never ending, which is really fun for me. So I want to go into a little bit more detail about what exactly my lab works on. So specifically, I look at how marginalization relates to poor health and health behaviors. Specifically, we know that there are racial disparities and socioeconomic disparities in health outcomes, where you see that people who are from a racially minoritized background or a low income background tend to have poorer health. And we see this consistently across studies. People tend to look at this specifically in adults, but it's not like these things magically happen overnight. Rather, these consequences of marginalization are going to be carrying out across a person's lifespan. From a developmental perspective, I'm really interested in looking at how these things might be emerging as early as the teen years. How might marginalization be affecting our health in ways that we might not even be realizing yet? With the hope that by recognizing these things earlier in development, we might be able to better intervene and better provide positive supports to help youth. So when I say marginalization, you might be thinking of different things. When I think of marginalization, I think of, well, you can think of on a piece of paper how there's that, of lined paper, how there's that red line indicating the margins. Marginalization refers to people who are on the margins of society. There's a lot of ways that societies develop to favor certain individuals over other or provide advantages to certain groups of individuals based on their social identities, based on their race, based on their education or income. So marginalization is referring to all the different ways that people might be systematically disadvantaged or positioned, or systematically disadvantaged in society. I look at it in a couple of different ways. I look at social status and discrimination and racial identity. So social status, that can mean a lot of different things. I tend to think of this like social ladder, this idea that there are some people who are higher up on that ladder, that people keep trying to climb further and further up and be positioned to be a little bit higher standing relative to other people. Oftentimes, people think of this in terms of income or being the most educated, and there's a lot of different ways of measuring this. How I often am measuring it is we literally will show people a ladder and ask them, okay, regardless of why this might be, when you think about yourself relative to other people, where do you stand on this ladder? Do you view yourself as a tippy top of society or more towards the bottom? And we see that this is something that predicts people's how long they live. It predicts how they handle stress. It's predicting a lot of different aspects about their day-to-day life. Additionally, I'll look at discrimination and racial identity. So specifically, there are lots of things people do day to day, individually, where they might be excluding someone or mistreating someone based on aspects of their social identity. Although this doesn't need to be at an individual level, we can also see it at a societal level in terms of laws. So I'm interested in how marginalization relates to health, but I also want to know why. What I'm really passionate about is understanding how these different daily experiences might be affecting people. So specifically, it's really fun studying the teen years because there's a lot of dynamic things happening. We see that teens are engaging with their parents, they're engaging with their friends and their classmates, and then they're also developing romantic and really close personal relationships. So when I'm looking at daily experiences, there can be a lot of different things, and it varies by the study. Sometimes I might be looking at family meals. Sometimes I might be looking at how much they're helping their families. A big piece of my work is trying to look at both positive and negative pathways. So specifically, sometimes we can look at arguments and conflict, how some youth might be having more negative experiences day to day. And other times we'll look at positive things, such as getting along with people, having positive relationship quality with the other people around them. So I'm interested in looking at the content of these experiences, like what types of experiences they're having and how often. But another really key piece of my work is looking at how people are responding or interpreting these experiences. You can have a lot of positive things happen day to day, but it might not mean anything to you. You might not be able to appreciate or enjoy those things. So that can be on an emotional level, but we also have these physiological or psychobiological responses. So just as an example, if you can imagine, let's say you have an exam in school. People can handle that exam really differently. Regardless if something stressful or something you're really invested in is happening, we tend to see that there's a physiological or a biological pattern. So oftentimes we see that people are engaged. We see activation. Hopefully you can connect with this and imagine your body being active and your heart racing. So we can look at how people are responding, what's changing inside of them. So we can look at how they're reacting to something in their day-to-day life. And after that experience is over, they'll go back to their baseline state. You can imagine being really worried about an exam, but once that exam's over, you're feeling relieved. So we'll be looking at, or in my lab, we'll be looking at how some people are showing these large reactions and other people are how some people are showing these large reactions and other people might be showing smaller reactions. And also how some people might be able to recover and other people might show this physiological or biological activation for a longer period of time. Again, the stress response, it's really meant to help us. Oftentimes, everyone assumes stress is a bad thing. We should never have a stress response. But there are a lot of ways that this is able to help us meet our demands, help us be engaged in our day-to-day life. Unfortunately, though, some people are experiencing stressors more often than others, especially if they're marginalized or in a situation where they are disadvantaged relative to other people. So, where we can have issues is even though that stress response is meant to help us, if you're having that stress response over and over and over again, our bodies really don't like that. Over time, if you're experiencing that stress response repeatedly, that's bringing wear and tear down on your body. You might have heard this called allostatic load, or it's this buildup of stress on your body over time. And because our body doesn't like that, it can actually change how we handle stress, how we're responding to stress day to day. And we can see these differences emerge in childhood. So it's really interesting to look at how people are handling stress and what these individual differences might mean for our health. What it means for someone who's really stress reactive versus someone who's not, who's cool as a cucumber, not showing the stress reactivity. And finally, my key outcome is often health and health behaviors. And if you take a moment and ask yourself, what is health? What does that look like? It's not just one thing. We can look at this in a ton of different ways. And across days, we tend to measure a lot of different things at once. We can look at mental health and positive well-being, which are not the same thing, right? You can be, we often see that some people who are perfectionists, they're simultaneously really anxious, really depressive, but when they do well, they feel like they're thriving. So we will often look at mental health and psychological well-being as two different things. We can look at obesity risk, and we can also look at what people are eating day to day, right? So we can look at these things in terms of one health marker, but also the process of how they're getting there, what health behaviors people do day to day. I'm really interested in psychobiology, and there's a lot of different systems that might be communicating within you. What I mean by that is you might have heard of cortisol, your stress hormone. So that's specifically part of one system, the HPA axis. But then you probably also heard of your fight or flight system. These are all different systems that are trying to manage things in your body that all have a lot of different functions. So we can look at how these systems are operating and if they're working together in the ways that we might expect. Like I mentioned before, substance use is another really key health behavior during the teen years I'm interested in. You can say that a lot of different ways. Age of first use, how often they're using, how intensively they're using, how many substances they're using at once. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a flavor as to what I'm studying and what I'm passionate about. But a big question is why? Why bother going through all of this? So my research has two main goals. One is to document how marginalization can affect health throughout the lifespan. This is really to try and like make policymakers care, hopefully have them to recognize, well, your children or your children's friends might be positioned for poorer health because of these things that are beyond their control. We're creating this world for children where some of them are disadvantaged, and just showing that these outcomes are real. And it's not showing that these outcomes are manifesting really early in development hopefully will make policymakers really um, care enough to intervene and actually use their influence. One thing I want to highlight is, to me, I don't. Sometimes people view the psychobiological measures as more sciency. I don't really view it that way. For me, how a person is feeling, it's their reality, it's their truth. So if they're feeling terrible, if they're getting really stressed emotionally, that's just as important as what's happening biologically. That being said, sometimes policymakers believe like to see something in a lab report. They like to see, oh, this is what their blood is saying. So then they might believe that a little bit more. I just want to clarify that sometimes that having the measures together can really build evidence so that you're able to convince more people. But I'm not trying to say that one is more important than another. Sorry, give me 1 second. I just need to grab my charger. Sorry about that. Well, I'll keep going to talk about what's the second reason. So I'm really interested again in why this might be happening. I think it's not surprising to hear that people from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds might be positioned for poorer health. That being said, if you understand why, if you can understand what's happening in their day-to-day life, maybe then we can try and scaffold things so that we can better support people if they're different day-to-day experiences. Um, Additionally, by understanding the pathways, hopefully we can develop interventions that can promote health. Okay, so hopefully you're on board for what do I do? So now let's talk about how do we actually go about doing this. So I've been using the word stress a ton, but we haven't even defined that yet. Um, so specifically, hopefully you can recognize when you feel stressed, what that feeling is. I encourage you to try and reflect on what are the things that make something stressful versus not. What are some things that come to mind? So when you ask stress researchers, there's a ton of different definitions. I try to stick to one common definition, which is that stressor is just any experience where there are demands placed upon you that require additional resources, something that's not just super easy for you to do on the fly in the moment. So I think you can personally relate to this. I hope it's hard. Stress is always around us. There are times where you might feel overwhelmed, times where you need additional support or you need help from people. That being said, it happens all the time where people come up to me and say, I'm super stressed. I can't handle this. This is, it feels like everything is, I'm feeling stress from all of these things. Is there something you can do to just get rid of the stress? But part of why I like this definition is that there's a lot of things that are stressful. Unfortunately, it's really hard to lead a life where there's no demands placed upon you. But also, we are social creatures. We people tend to thrive when they are able to engage with other people, and that might involve having people ask you to do things. For you all as college students, there's a lot of different demands placed on you. Academically, that might be challenging, but also socially, from your family, from work. And even though these things can be really challenging, hopefully you see that there's a payoff and that you're able to benefit in a lot of ways. Oftentimes, we see that people who are unchallenged, they're not really thriving. They're not feeling good about their day-to-day life because they're not really experiencing these benefits from overcoming challenges or these benefits from facing stressors. We generally are not dealing with stressors for the sake of it. Normally, we're engaging with stressors so that then we can go through a learning process, further establish our relationships. My attitude about stress is that it's something that's essential for life. It's something that we need to learn how to live with, not just avoid. We need to be able to engage with it so that we can lead the most fulfilling possible lives. That's not to say that people should be trying to have the most stressful life possible. That's not what I'm saying at all. But rather than trying so hard to avoid all forms of stress, rather, I think that people can change their mentalities about stress and try to manage it in their day-to-day life. There's really compelling evidence that if you change people's mindset about stress, have them instead of view stress as damaging, instead view it as stress is enhancing. Stress is just a bodily response that's trying to help me to do what I need to get my work done so I can enjoy all these other things in my life. When people have that mindset, they tend to have a lot of better health outcomes, and we see differences even in their biological levels of hormones like cortisol. This evidence is so compelling that a lot of universities across the country have actually adopted these interventions, where then at orientation, students are getting training in developing a growth mindset and changing their mindset about stress specifically. So I keep talking about stress and how we handle stress. There's a lot of different ways that that our bodies handle stress. So there's psychological differences. You know how it feels when you have this dread, you have these negative emotions. We can also see changes in these positive emotions as well. However, in addition to these emotional aspects, we have a lot of things that are happening biologically. So specifically, you recognize something in your brain, and then it's going through your body. It's affecting your autonomic nervous system, your fight or flight system. It might also be affecting hormones like cortisol. And all of these different systems are probably going to affect your immune system. And this is part of why when you're really, really stressed, that might make you more vulnerable to illness, more likely to get sick, and also have more symptoms if you are sick. So we see differences in brain activation. Then we see differences in cortisol and fight or flight systems, differences in your immune system, and even differences in your sleep, your body's attempt to like restore itself. So I often am looking at all of these different systems, and we can look at stress in a lot of different ways. But again, what I'm interested in is not just like looking at stress for the sake of it. There's this idea that it's not just about how much stress you experience, but how you're handling it. So in our work, we'll model how people handle stress, and some of them are going to show this up-down pattern like we'd expect. Some people might show it even more so. They might be greater stress responders. They might be more reactive, and other people might show a blunted response. They might be less reactive. And again, the goal of my work is to try and measure all these things to try and understand what does that mean for your health? What does it mean if someone's showing a greater stress response versus a smaller stress response? So I'm saying stress response a lot. What do we actually do in the lab to try and understand these responses? So I personally think that as a psychologist, the reason research methods is so important, the reason why I teach it, is because the research methods is really like your toolkit. It's giving you all of these different options for how to carry out experiments or how to test a research question. It's not necessary, they all have pros and cons. So it's not just about being married to this is my one method that I'll always use. But the more methods you get experience with, the more you understand, the more you can really delve into an area of work. So I'm going to highlight first laboratory-based measures. So when it comes to stressors, there's different types of stressors. You might have challenges that are more manageable, and you can have threats. I want to highlight both of these. One thing that we'll we'll have people do when they're in the lab is we'll just tell them we have a tracing task. You need to come in and you can trace the star. But then we tell them actually you're not able to see your hand. Rather, you're looking at a mirror image of your hand. You might have experienced this where if you look at your Zoom camera and it's not flipped, it's really hard. When you try to move left, you might actually be moving right. If you look at in a mirror, if you're trying to, sometimes you're going to have to be going the opposite way. This is why it's a lot harder for us to cut our own hair because you don't have as much, because what you're seeing does not necessarily map onto what you're feeling, and how you think you're moving your body. Everything is mirror flipped. So we'll administer this task because it's something that's not high stakes. You know, we tell people to do their best, but it is challenging. And oftentimes people get better with practice. So we'll do this as a more mild challenge, right? There's demands placed upon people. And it can be difficult to meet these goals, but with practice, if they really try, they might be able to get better with time. Another thing we'll do sometimes, we haven't done it at UCSC, don't worry, but a really common gold standard in the field is this Trier social stress test developed in Trier, Germany. Specifically, they'll come into the lab, they chill out, watch a video for 15 minutes, and then you ask them, okay, so when you graduate, when you graduate after college, what do you want to do when you grow up? You want to be a psychologist or a therapist? Awesome. You now have 5 minutes to prepare a speech as to why you would be a good therapist, and you're going to be trained by two people in white lab coats who are trained in evaluating you. And then they actually have to do this. They're giving this speech while being video recorded to two experts on this. And then it's really hard to come up with a professional 5 minute speech on the fly. So a lot of people have trouble with this. It can be really stressful for those 5 minutes. They're just trying to get through it. There's a stopwatch timing them the whole time. And once they finish those 5 minutes, then they're told, okay, now please subtract 1,892 by 13s as quickly and accurately as possible. You made a mistake, please start over. I'm sorry, you made a mistake. Can you please try again? Start over again. Can you go faster? It's really important that you try harder and go faster. These are really stressful experiences for people. This was designed because it was this idea that most people are probably afraid of either public speaking or mental math. So maybe that sounds stressful to you. We call that the Trier social stress test. We look at how all of these biological and emotional levels are changing across this period. And then we don't want anyone to leave the lab upset. So we have a recovery period for another hour for people to watch a movie, relax, and then we debrief them and tell them, these were people who were designed to be giving you a hard time. So while people are doing this, we're measuring a lot of different things. If you're interested in cortisol, for instance, that's a hormone you can measure in your blood, but also in your saliva. So you might collect saliva samples before they start anything, and then every 15 minutes thereafter, so that we can look at how these things are changing over time. You might be interested in measuring heart rate. So you'll attach electrodes to people around their chest or on their wrists. And you're able to just measure that consistently across the period. So you can look at when people's hearts are racing, for how long, whose hearts are racing more than others. That's oversimplifying a bit. There's a lot of different things that we need to do in order to make this heart rate data actually interpretable. I don't have it shown on here, but we'll administer surveys throughout so that we can figure out how are people feeling? How are they feeling? Are they feeling sadness, anger? Who's feeling sadder at a given time? And in my work, I see a lot of associations between how people are handling the stress and things like substance use, for instance. So you might be thinking, I'm already so stressed. What's the point of doing this? Um, uh, like, do I really need someone to be eliciting stress for me? Well, we'll do natural experiments. So this is looking at, people already experience a lot of stress. So why not just capitalize on this moment? So for instance, one really common stressor that college students experience is academic exams. So we've done, for instance, a course where we look at people in the Psych 2 class, and we had them complete emotion surveys the night before the exam. They then had the exam, and then we had them complete emotion surveys after the exam as well. With that, we can look at how are people feeling before versus after. Who's showing these bigger emotion changes? So we can compare levels of emotion between before and after. There's also a lot of big stressors we experience in day-to-day life. One that you might have, one that you're probably aware of is that news can be really stressful. Another study we recently did was looking at the election period and how people might be handling this election period differently than others. How some people, when they hear about political news, might respond differently. So we can use these natural experiments, look at how things are changing over time. We can also use daily surveys. So with the natural experiment, that's everyone in your sample is experiencing the same stressor, so it's still standardized in a way, even though it's not in the lab. However, everyone's experiencing different types of stressors and they're experiencing them all every day or throughout their week. So what we can do is we can have people do a daily diary. We can message them every day for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and ask them at the end of each day, how are you feeling emotionally? How was your sleep? Did you use any substances? We can measure other health behaviors like did you exercise? Did you eat well today? So we can look at all of these different measures of health on a day-to-day basis. And you can also ask people what happened today. Did you experience any arguments? Did you experience any work demands? And also, did you experience good things? Did you get along with the people around you? Did you have anything positive happen? So hopefully this gives you a good sense of all the different ways that we can test how stress is getting under the skin and affecting our health. So this gives you a little flavor of like what happens in the lab. How are we getting this data? I want to go over like what do we actually do with this data? What does the peer review process mean? Hopefully you've heard of peer review, but I want to try and demystify it a little bit if you didn't know exactly what's happening behind the wheel. So let's say I submit an art. Let's say I spend like all of this time, years collecting data, now writing the paper, and now I finally want to get this out there for the world. Well, an editor of the journal is hopefully a scientist, and what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, let's find 2 to 4 experts in the field who can give feedback, who can read this and say, is what this person is saying true? Did they design this well? Are their conclusions valid? So now I'm an editor for a journal, and I'm often asked to review papers. So I end up being the editor and a reviewer for different journals. Let's say you get asked to be a reviewer. Well, then you're going to read the paper and you're going to provide an outline of what all the strengths and weaknesses are. And you're going to say either this paper should be accepted, you can say it's rejected, there's no hope for it, I don't think it's contributing to science. Or most often you'll say, it's kind of there. There are these things I agree with, these things I don't agree with. This process can be kind of painful because there are people who are providing just a list of everything that they feel like you did wrong. And sometimes you read it and you're like, I don't agree with this at all. And other times you're like, oh shoot, why didn't I think about this before I was collecting data for years and years? But all this is meant to be constructive. This is people who are trying to make sure that the best science gets out. And they're really trying to provide feedback and suggestions for maybe you can view it this way. Did you consider these other possibilities? Is there anything in your data set you can use to get at this possible pathway? So based on all of these reviews, the editor is then going to decide whether to offer a revision or to accept or reject the paper. If they offer a revision, this means that then I now get that whole list of everything I did wrong, but then I have the opportunity to try and make all of these changes. I get the chance to improve that paper and then send it back to the reviewers and say, okay, I changed all these things. How does it look now? Did I address all of your concerns? This process happens over and over and over again until they finally reach a decision of, yes, this paper is contributing to science and you've addressed all these concerns. Or it might get rejected and they say, you couldn't really address the concerns. All of these things are too big of an issue for us to really know what's happening here. It can be painful to get a rejection, but again, it's all really for the betterment of science. It's really trying to it's important not to personalize it. We just want to have the best information possible out there. So this is just a visual description of what I had said before. You submit an article, it might get rejected, or it might get rejected with the invitation to resubmit and get feedback. Normally, that process of reviewers getting selected and looking at your article, that can be anywhere from 1 to 6 months. It's really, really uncommon for a paper to be accepted right away. That's never happened to me. Normally, even though we try our best, there's always things we can improve in a paper. Let's say your article got rejected. Well, you might submit it somewhere else, right? You might resubmit that article. You might make your own changes and submit to another venue now that you've incorporated feedback. But let's say it got rejected, but they encourage you to resubmit to that same journal, to that same place. Then you might have another 1 to 3 months to then make all of these changes, submit that article again, and tell them, hey, thanks for the feedback. This is everything I did to make it better. From there, a few different things can happen. We're kind of going back to where we were before. It might be that now they reject it, or it might be that they say, oh, good try, but we still have all of these other concerns. So you might go through this loop over and over again, maybe one time, maybe 3 times for a given paper with the same journal. But hopefully, once you've incorporated all of their feedback and made all the changes, then your paper might get accepted. So that'll be another that the reviewers always have 1 to 3 months to review and provide feedback on it. So what I want to convey here is that people think you collected the data, now just analyze it and write it up. That process takes a while, and then this publication process also is taking a really long time. Hopefully you can see how often this is on the scale of years already. So it is a drawback. This is part of why it's so hard for us to get things out there, but it is intentionally a rigorous process. Again, there's a lot of different ways to interpret data. We like to think of it as objective, black and white, but we all have our own positionality that colors how we might view certain things. So we need to get this anonymous feedback so that we can make sure that we're considering all the different possible options. Okay, so I want to just really quickly go over a few of the different sub areas of my work. I talk a lot about stress and how we handle it, but I will apply this to different lenses. One thing I look at is perceived social class. I talked about this a little bit with this social ladder. We literally show people a ladder and say the people who are the best off are at the top, the people who are the worst off, the most mistreated, the most under-resourced are at the bottom. Think for a bit of where you might fall on this ladder. Across my work, I consistently find that people who are lower on this ladder, they tend to show greater psychobiological responses across systems for a lot of different types of stressors. So that was daily stressors, the laboratory-based, and the naturalistic. We see these effects are consistent across all of them. Where if you're lower on this ladder, that you might tend to show greater stress responses. I have a lot of work looking at racial and ethnic identity and discrimination and how this may affect people's health and children's development. I look at stress reactivity with specifically with respect to emotion dynamics, how much people's emotions might be going up and down across the day. And I mentioned a few times, substance use is just something that I really consistently see as related to the stress response, really related to emotion dynamics and all of these things. So these are, I highlight this because if you have any questions, if you're really interested in one of these areas, I encourage you to shoot me an email or ask questions during the Q&A. So I thought I'd just go over a couple big takeaways from my field. So I try to look at who shows bigger stress responses, who's more reactive. And again, I see that people lower social status tend to have greater stress responses. But there's a lot of positive things that we can do in our day-to-day life. We see that people who have a stronger sense of purpose, people who have a lot more positive experiences or social experiences in their day, they tend to be less reactive. So even though there might be these social positions in society that affect how we respond to stress or what stressors we face, there are things that we can scaffold in day-to-day life. And it seems like I try to really emphasize that well-being is not just the opposite of stress. We see here that maintaining positive well-being, maintaining a positive outlook, maintaining purpose really can affect how we handle stress, how we're responding. What have I found about stress and substance use since I keep mentioning it? Well, it's really complicated, actually. It looks like oftentimes the kids who are disengaged, the ones who show blunted stress response, the ones who are really not responding to stress, they might tend to use substances earlier. They might be more inclined to get involved with the wrong crowd or just be more impulsive. We're not sure exactly what it is, but if you have a more blunted stress response, you're less reactive. We see that those individuals tend to use substances earlier. But for those who have a greater stress response, especially in college years, especially later in high school and continued in adulthood, we see those who are more stress reactive, kind of in line with a coping self-medication model. They tend to use more frequently and more intensively. So put another way, people aren't normally using the substance for the first time because they're really upset and having this big stress response. But once people are familiar with it, it's really easy to start using it as a way of handling stress or a way of coping with stress. Another thing I've been looking at more recently is when do individuals show larger stress responses? That election study is something that I did at UCSC, so it's really relevant to the student population. And what we see is that the election itself can be a stressful period. We see people often have poor mental health, but we also see that how people handle day-to-day stressors during that time might also be increasing. What I mean by that is, I can show a figure to try and get at this. So what we did for this is we followed people for like a month after the election. And what we could look at is on days when you have a fight, when you have a conflict, how are you handling that? How are you feeling at the end of the day? And I'll be showing here just how much of a negative emotional response do people have on days when they have a political discussion. So on some days, it doesn't really affect your mood at all if you have this type of discussion. But for other people, they might get really worked up. They might get really emotionally invested and be upset at the end of the day if they have this type of discussion, right? Because politics can be stressful. So we see it might depend on aspects of a person, but with this study, we saw that it really depends on the timing of these major stressors. So I'm showing here, oops, is that this emotional reactivity is highest. It's the highest up on here immediately following the election. But the further and further we get, we see about 10 days afterwards, we see that we're by zero. We're seeing that there's not this much of an emotional response or change in our emotions based on having this type of discussion. I'm showing it here for reactivity to political discussions, but we also see it for reactivity to arguments, reactivity to work demands, and other things. So at this point, I told you about what do I study, how do I study it, what have I found. But what are ways that you all can be involved? What are some contributions that research assistants make? So one thing is literature searches and reviewing manuscripts, right? I emphasize that peer review process, and everyone should be a part of it. So there are a lot of ways that, well, because I'm studying teenagers and young adults often, unfortunately, I'm a little far removed from this age period. So it's really helpful for me to get other people's viewpoints. And we really want to come at it from a strengths-based perspective. We don't want to make assumptions about people. It's really helpful to have research assistants involved in interpreting the data and seeing how they're viewing things. A big thing is also that when you collect this biological data, it's people love it because they think, okay, this is objective. How can you get confused about heart rate? Heart rate is super complicated, for instance, and machines can make errors. There's a big data editing process to try and figure out what actually is happening here. Did their heart skip a beat? Literally? Did the machine just not capture that heartbeat? So we can't use the raw heart rate data as it is. What we actually do is we have to figure out where are all of these peaks on it. And then often we'll be using those data, converting all of the data, putting it through all of these transformations. And we'll end up with something instead of that beautiful heart rate above, we'll have this kind of uglier curve and we'll have to actually edit it to try and figure out, okay, this is where the machine makes an error. This is where their actual heart rate is. It's this process of figuring out what is the real data. And it's hard. We don't want to fabricate data. So it's a really extensive process for getting trained in collecting heart rate and then editing and managing that heart rate data. Um, so we'll measure heart rate when it comes to laboratory-based study, but we also have these daily surveys. So as you all know, you have a lot of things going on in your life. It can be easy to lose track of these surveys. So it's a big thing that research assistants will be sending out these surveys, following up with people to say, hey, you missed a couple days. How can we get you back on track? We really want you to be a part of the study. So what can we do to get you engaged? When we're doing in-person data collection, it's a really key part of the process that we need to get people in seats, get people into the lab. So flyering, recruiting is a big part of this. Additionally, when it comes to getting the findings, I think that sharing this scientific information is like our responsibility. People dedicate so much time to being part of a study, they deserve to know what the findings are. So a big process is also disseminating this information, maybe through infographics, maybe through social media posts. So we're trying to, or maybe giving a volunteer talk at a local school district. So really trying to share this information, get skills in science communication. And I have leading physiological data collection with a question mark because this process has taken a little bit longer than I like, but we're hoping to be able to launch our in-person physiological and biological data collection either winter quarter or spring quarter. What do I mean by this? Well, what we do is we have to apply 7 electrodes to a person. And depending on the protocol, it could be more than that, it could be less than that. You have to be trained to be able to make someone feel comfortable, try to apply these in the right places so that we can measure the right things. If things are off by a little bit, we have to measure and we have to account for it in the analysis. So I had shown before the data editing, but I'm really excited to be able to do a larger scale physiological data collection with some of those in-person lab tasks. So these are common ways for that students get involved in the lab. I do want to highlight just ways to get involved in the psychology department more generally. So I'm hoping you're all aware, but a really key opportunity I recommend is experiential learning, and that can be through the field study program or through research. So, at the field study program, you get an academic internship program. You can gain hands-on reflexive experience with varied careers. Oftentimes, students are working with clinical psychology, working with prisons, working with the local school districts, maybe working with data analysis. So this internship, it's something that I got to do when I was an undergrad back in North Carolina, and it was one of the most formative experiences for me. I loved working with that local school district. So it's something I just encourage everyone to get involved in and be able to apply apply what they learn. And now they offer an international version that's in Dublin, Ireland, as well as in South Africa. And of course, there's the psychology research opportunities through Psych 194. If you're interested in anything that I've talked about, I encourage you to take my courses, Psych 100 and Psych 109, the psychobiology of stress and well-being. I think it really helps to be able to get content experience before jumping into a lab, but everyone has different preferences. Um, and speaking of preferences, it happens a lot where students say, I had no idea how to get into a lab. Do you have any advice? So my biggest advice is to read faculty websites for current projects. Everyone tends to have their own processes for applying, their own preferences for what they're looking for from students. For me, I have a really detailed website about how can students get involved, what do we do in the lab. It's always really impressive to me when students say that they've already been reading articles or they read the website and they were really interested in a protocol that I did or a project I did. Oftentimes, the students say, Hey, I want to meet just to learn more about what you do. Can you just give me a quick spiel? I'll normally tell them, Hey, please just go through the lab website first so that you can learn a little bit. And then if you still have questions, let me know. Just because we put a lot of effort into that website and we want everything to be clear there. Um, I'm trying to see if I have any other recommendations. Always through the faculty page, always read recent or just look through recent publications. If people have specific questions, I'm always happy to answer questions. But when people have specific questions, when it's clear they've done their homework, it makes the conversation just go a lot smoother. I know it can be really nerve-wracking reaching out to faculty, but again, we all do this research because we're passionate about it, so we're happy to talk about it. Um, Other things I recommend looking at what my graduate students are working on because the graduate students I had in the photos earlier, they're working on all of these same things and their experiences are a little bit different from mine. They often are leading their own individual projects, so they can be a really valuable source of information. I also always recommend to people, please, please, please proofread your resume. Show that you care, right? That's part of why I mentioned looking at the website, showing that you are invested enough to put in your due diligence. When I see that people have not proofread their resume, my mind immediately goes to if they aren't consistent in what they're really providing, what's specific to them, then how can I be sure that they're going to have that eye for detail that we need when it comes to being systematic in a data protocol or being really conscientious about data editing? So put your best foot forward and show how much you care by having a really good resume. If you don't hear back from someone, I always encourage you to follow up, reach out. We're all just really busy people, so we're not trying to ignore anyone. And if you don't hear back, your graduate students can be a really good source of support as well. That being said, joining a lab, it's something that we love having research assistants be engaged in our work. But that being said, it is time intensive for us just getting everyone up to speed. So please just be mindful of if you can really handle that time responsibility. Are you able to commit to being in the lab for at least a quarter, if not two? And that's my email, which is I think can be shared as well. With that in mind, I'd love to be able to take any questions that you all have. Thanks for bearing with me for that kind of long presentation.
Students can go ahead and either raise their hand on Zoom or type questions into the chat. We have about 4 minutes for questions.
There we go.
Yeah, Micah, go for it. Or Mika, sorry, I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
Micah. Sorry, that took me a second. I couldn't find the raise hand. Um, I had a question about, it's a little more general about research. I was wondering how you can kind of distinguish a single focal research question. I've been like kind of trying to think about it in terms of what kind of research I'd want to do in the future, but it seems kind of difficult to put it into one question. It seems like without it being too broad, because I feel like that would probably be an issue as well. So I was wondering if you have advice or tips on how to kind of make it more specific and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, this is something that every graduate student has trouble with as well, because um, we're get so excited we want to test a million different things. What I always tell people is that your first project hopefully is not your last project, right? I've been able to have a career of doing so many different projects. So even though we're so tempted to throw in a million different things, I always try to tell people, why don't you choose two variables you're interested in, think of how they are related to one another. It's really common in psychology to test what's called mediation and moderation. That's just another way to throw in a third variable. It might be that we are looking at when X relates to Y, or for whom X relates to Y. Or if you have an experiment or a longitudinal study, you might be able to say X relates to Y, which then relates to Z. Um, but oftentimes I tell people, let's start with those two or three variables and not get too crazy with it. That being said, we're passionate about so many things. It's really hard to go from I'm interested in health equity to what am I doing in one specific study. Um, but yeah, the idea is that you might choose just one specific example to get started with. Once you have those results, then you can try it with a slightly different paradigm or a slightly different example. For me, I try to do all of these studies with different types of stressors, for instance, and then different types of systems. Does that help a little bit? Great. Yeah, great question.
Oh, we have time for about one or two more questions. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and either, like I said, type them in the chat or raise your hand on Zoom.
Yeah, I think go for it, Micah.
Cool. Um, so you showed a chart on the what was it? Research takeaway slide, and I was wondering how you quantified emotional reactivity. It was like -2 to 4.
Yeah, so with that, what we're doing, the numbers themselves can be a little bit trickier, but literally what we do is um with when it comes to daily surveys, we'll look at days when you have that stressor and days when you don't have that stressor. And then we can see, okay, on days when you don't have that discussion, your negative emotion is at like a 3. And on days when you do have that stressor, then on average, your negative emotion might be at like a 4 or a 5. And we're really, what the statistical model is doing is it's taking the difference in your average level of negative emotion on days when that does happen and on the days when it doesn't happen. So, like a 0.8 would mean across all the items that you're showing an increase in those ratings. The reason that the number itself is a little harder to interpret is it a 1 to 5 scale? Is it a 1 to 7 scale? Um, so that's why we have other things like what's called effect sizes to try and figure out is this a big difference or is it a small difference? But with what I had shown, that really is that across like these 8 emotions, you're showing an increase of like 0.8 on days that you're having that event. Does that make sense? Yeah, the statistical part can be scary to people. I personally really love it just because the more statistics you understand, it really can help you to start thinking about all of these different associations in different ways than you might have otherwise.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rahal. This was super informative. I'm sure I can speak for all